welcome back. So we have a fantastic panel conversation now on creating a culture of belonging. And we mean in physical activity, in movement, in sport, in active travel, in all of it. We've talked a lot this morning about belonging and what that means to different people. And now we really want to hear from this fantastic group of people to go, well, how do we create that culture of belonging for everybody, everywhere? What is our collective game plan? So I have the pleasure of introducing a wonderful woman who I like to call friend, as well as co-conspirator in lots of wonderful things. So Professor Helen Pankhurst is an international development and women's rights advisor to Care International, working across Ethiopia and UK. She's a professor at MMU. In fact, I got to see your kind of ceremony, didn't I? That was a beautiful Lem Sessi and Helen Pankhurst in a real moment of kind of how you put the humanity into formality. It was a beautiful ceremony. And I know her as a convener for GM for Women, which I'm involved in. I know many other people in this space are trying to make Greater Manchester a better place for women and girls. She is also, clue is in the name, the granddaughter of Sylvia and the great-granddaughter of Emmeline Pankhurst. Yes, that's pretty cool, isn't it? That's talk about standing or on the shoulders of giants. And she really, don't forget Andy Burnham. We've got Helen. And she's got lots of publications. I've got lots of her books on my shelves, including Deeds Not Words, one of my favourite slogans, The Story of Women's Rights, and Then and Now. So she's a great facilitator. And I'm going to hand straight over to Helen to introduce our panel.
Thanks, Eve.
Thank you.
Thanks. Really lovely to be here. Thank you all. Just to start by describing myself, because of that heritage, I am inevitably always in purple, green, and some element of white. The white is often not as visible, and greying hair and glasses, and I like to think I feel quite fit, so relevant to all of this. Thanks for being in this session. I don't know about the rest of you, but there's been so much thought already, and there's a lot buzzing, I think, in our minds from what we've heard. But a bit more to add to the mix from this wonderful group here. What I'd like to do is introduce them first, and I'll do it one after the other, and then each one in turn will say a few things to that question of belonging and how that links to issues of active lives and the interconnections, I think, between belonging and activity. So a bit more about each of the panel members. So Sally first, Sally Carr, who worked across Greater Manchester and has done so for over 35 years, often on the fringes of the sports sector, and she's been able to influence and encourage marginalised communities such as LGBTQ girls and young women, gypsy and traveller young people to take up movement, physical activity and sport in ways that work best for them. Thank you. Yes, let's please have some clapping. Thank you. Thank you, thank you. Sanjay Bandari is the chair of Kick It Out, English football's leading inclusion charity. He is a frequent public commentator and recognised as a leader in inclusion. Sanjay is a board member at the Lawn Tennis Association and is a member of the Inclusion Advisory Board at the Football Association. Okay. Belinda Everett is the Greater Manchester Bicycle Mayor, again, who needs another mayor? And founder of the Be Pedal Ready. She's part of the change in diversifying the cycling industry and supporting and connecting local grassroots initiatives in creating spaces for women and young girls to fix, ride and repair bicycles. Next we've got Kelly Gordon, who's an experienced sports development professional specialising in driving systemic change in the understanding of female health across sport and beyond. She's had links with Sports England, England Netball and PwC. And last but not least, Adam Blaze, who's the Chief Executive of Activity Alliance, the leading voice for disabled people in sports and activity. He began his role in January 2023 and has dedicated, prior to that, his career to changing attitudes towards disabled people in sport and activity. Thank you. So I think the key elements that's coming out of this speaks to one of the slides that we saw earlier around the link between activity or the lack of activity and inclusion or the lack of inclusion. And I think that is just so central to everything that we've been looking at today. And how does that link to the sense of belonging? So what does that mean in terms of our sense of belonging? Do also please reflect and think about that, and maybe towards the end we can pick up on some of your thoughts on it as well. But let's start with Sally, your thoughts on that question.
Yeah, lovely. Thanks so much, Helen. Hello, everybody. Thank you for choosing this session. My name's Sally, and I'm just going to describe myself a little bit. I'm wearing a beautiful green cashmere jumper today and some lovely blue cords. I'm white passing, but I'm actually Romani Gypsy. So if you put me beside my brothers, their skin is much darker than mine. And I'm also a disabled person, LGBTQ plus person, and a little bit older now at 57. So the question about belonging, yeah. I think, it's interesting listening to the other speakers today, and particularly about the embodiment of feelings and around trauma and experiences of that. And belonging for me is that when you can see and hear people in the world who look and sound like you, instantly gives you a sense of belonging. And for a lot of Gypsy Roma traveller communities, that is absent. So when I thought about the question about belonging, I thought actually it's about the absence of things. It's about the absence of a fast-paced breathing. So if I'm breathing slow and deep and I'm calmer, I feel like I belong. And some of that is about the efforts of other people to change the culture, to adopt inclusive practices and to address discrimination so you don't have to. So when I think about belonging, it's about the work and effort that other people have put in and the need for allies and advocates and champions who don't silence my voice, but amplify it.
Hi everyone, I'm Sanjay. For those who can't see me, I am Indian origin, average height, though tall for an Indian. Wearing jeans and a bubblegum pink hoodie, and with a sort of semi-bushy grey beard. So if you bump into me outside, I'll be wearing a baseball cap. So I'm kind of a cross between an Indian Santa Claus and a trucker from Tennessee. In terms of a sense of belonging, what gives me a sense of belonging? I don't think I'm articulate enough to be able to give you a working definition of what belonging is. So I'll give you a couple of personal experiences of what makes me feel I belong, and I'll give you one from sport, one from activity. So seeing my team score a last-minute winner against my local rivals in an FA Cup quarter-final to win 4-3 with the last kick after 120 minutes, and to be hugging complete strangers and bouncing around completely in the moment makes me feel connected and makes me feel that I belong to that club. I'm part of that club's part of me. I've hugged people there more than I've hugged my wife. That gives me a sense of belonging. The more prosaic activity one, there was a session this morning, the Be Strong folks, and I'm also an addict, so I'm a recovering alcoholic. And when I was early in my sobriety, I wanted to get fit and to go to the gym, but it wasn't somewhere where I actually felt like I belonged, and I always sort of slightly frightened of the gym bunny, the hench gym bunnies, and that being an addict, you always think that other people are laughing at you. You think the world revolves around you. And so it's very, very easy to feel disconnected. Addiction is it's a sort of disease of isolation. And so I didn't feel like I belonged. But I turned up because it was something I wanted to do, and someone at the gym helped me. And now I'm 22 years sober, and actually being active and going to the gym. And my wife, who I met in sobriety, is a fitness instructor. I mean, I'm really a terrible example of her work, but but it made me feel connected. So what is belonging to me? It is a connection, but connection's only the start of it, because I can feel connected to something, but unless someone else reaches out to give me the confidence to maintain and build on that connection, I never actually get that sense of belonging. So it was easier for me to get connected to my football club and to get that sense of belonging, though there were lots of barriers. But there were also barriers, and maybe it was harder for me to feel connected to physical activity and to feel connected to my local gym and to build that sense of belonging over time. So I think belonging, in my experience, is not something that just happens, but it's something that can happen and can be built, but it has to be done consciously.
Hello, my name is Belinda. I am dual heritage. I am wearing a dungaree dress, which is corduroy dungaree dress, and some quite cool African print socks there. Can you see them? Let's switch out, very cool. Belonging wasn't an easy question. I had to really think and ponder about it, and I think the words that came up for me were safe, visible, calm, joyful, and light. For me personally, especially for anyone who doesn't know, I am also a qualified bike mechanic, and going into the bike industry as it is, I didn't feel a sense of belonging. To kind of put it lightly, it feels like being in the 1940s. It's very, you don't feel a sense of belonging and you don't feel a sense of openness. So for me, trying to find a sense of belonging, I had to kind of seek it and seek other people who were similar to myself, and that I could relate to, and kind of something that began as quite an emotional journey. So when I did, it was a very uplifting experience, a very joyful, and actually the difference between carrying on and actually not going into the bike industry. So that was something for me of what I really kind of related to. So I'll leave it there for now.
Hello, everybody. Hello. Hi, everybody. Kelly Gordon. So I'm definitely not looking as cool as Belinda. I feel like I'm more office wear, and this is more trend. I haven't got leopard skin colour socks on. So wearing navy blue predominantly, fairly tall, dark hair, and pleased to be here. So yeah, as we say, difficult question with lots of different meanings. And I raided my book cupboard as well, so I brought some book reading with me, which I'll share with you in a second. For me, a sense of belonging is being able to turn up and be your authentic self without any judgment. And I think you sort of explore what that means, and then I suppose you go down a bit of a rabbit hole of, well, when did I not feel that? And I didn't feel that at home when I was a kid. I lost my mum when I was younger, and I didn't have that sense of belonging at home. So I found that in sport, and then when I was in sport, it gave me that safe space. It gave me the role model of the netball coach, hence the career that I've probably gone into, and she provided me with that sense of belonging, and as did my teammates. So I think you find a sense of belonging, and maybe where you haven't had it and you find it elsewhere, and where you feel you can be your authentic self regardless of almost what's going on around you. I think the other element of that is you can't truly belong unless you really truly belong in yourself. And the two books that I have brought with me, Brené Brown, I have to mention Brené Brown at any point in my life, but Brené Brown, amazing, and Belonging. And if you haven't read any of those books, amazing books. And they both say similar things, Brené particularly, around that sense of belonging in yourself and being truly who you are. So I think there's two sides of belonging. For me, there's belonging, and particularly the belonging that sport can create, but also you can only belong if you belong to yourself.
Thanks, Kelly, and thanks all. It's definitely humbling to be on this panel. My name's Adam Blaze. I work for the Activity Alliance. Today you'll find me in black jeans, a maroon top, and a pair of Jordans that my teenage children told me I'm far too old to be wearing, but I went with them anyway. And I'm white, middle-aged, non-disabled male, which would probably make me Joey Barton's favourite, but that is not a good thing. belonging, what does that mean? It's definitely helpful going last so I can build on what people have said. But for me, it's when people can be themselves and bring themselves and be confident to do that in sport or in activity or whatever they're doing. And we find that when we're working with disabled people, that's not often the case. And I'm not going to talk about my day job, but I do a lot of voluntary sports coaching. And we find that people aren't able to be themselves when they turn up and come. We run inclusive sessions. And that's often because no one's ever bothered to ask someone what they want. And we will find, it's children's coaching, so we'll find young children, particularly in parents or disabled children that come along and they've just had things done to them. And they've gone and tried to find somewhere else, and they go to activity after activity. And the parents will be shocked that actually, what does your son or daughter want? How do they want to take part? Because they've had things done to them. Or like you already say, we're going to have a disability session. Actually, I just want to take part with my classmates who are playing football on a Saturday or going Beavers on a weekday. I can't do that. So to be able to turn up and be yourself and be who you want to be and not have to compromise your values, for me, that's definitely what belonging means in this context of sport and activity.
Thanks all. Really interesting connections between the individual breathing as a starting point of it, the connection to others, the connection to space, the connection to activities. Sally, you were going to show some slides, I think. Do you want to do that next?
Fine, thank you. Thanks, Helen. I'm going to stand up, otherwise I won't see them. So bear with me. I just did these because it just helps me frame some things. That's not mine. This is my slides. So I guess I positioned belonging in this framework of equity and inclusion and diversity, and it comes back to other people and about co-creating environments and cultures of belonging together. And you know, the previous panel talked about processes and how sometimes processes are actually exclude. So it's about how do we build more inclusive environments and practices and relationships. Belonging sits in the middle of all that if you get it right. But I also wanted to just put this up as well, the difference between fitting in and belonging. Belonging, it accepts us in our entirety as all aspects of ourselves, and yet what we know for a lot of people, and me included, there are situations where we code switch all the time because we've got past experience, we've got trauma, intergenerational trauma, our own trauma and so on, that has taught us that certain situations you can't necessarily always be your whole self. So in cultures where you have to fit in, that idea of belonging is perhaps missing, and it is about cultures where there is that diversity and inclusion, that equity that creates that belonging. And then I wanted to just bring this to the fore as my final slide, which is just this pyramid of need, which is based on Maslow's hierarchy of need, but it's actually about the therapeutic needs. And I think increasingly we talk about trauma-informed approaches, trauma-informed practice, and it recognises what happened to people. It's about people's experiences and what we need to do to actually enable people to feel safer, and ourselves in that feeling safer, and have relationships, and to be able to regulate within situations where we don't feel we belong, but also an openness to learn about empathy and reflection, because we'll never know it all. For me, the sense of a culture of belonging is not a fixed process, it's a dynamic process, it's ongoing, it has to be worked at. And that openness to explore trauma, to be able to talk about people's experiences as and when they feel they want to talk about those experiences, so that we can address those and develop more inclusive cultures about belonging. And it's interesting for me because coming from a Romani gypsy family, the phrase that would often be used is it's not who you are, it's who you're one of. And I think for a lot of communities, it is also about who you are one of that actually embraces that sense of belonging. And just the other little bit I wanted to just finish on was somebody said to me the other day, because I said I'm going to come and be on this panel, And they said, what's it about? I said, belonging. And then they said this phrase, and I thought, that's really good. They said, oh, yeah, that means like when you get it wrong, you still belong. And I thought, that is so counter to the cancelling culture that we find ourselves in, that space for exploration and making mistakes. And failure has been talked about today on this stage, and I think that's it, that we embrace when we get it wrong, because we can still belong.
I'm trying to turn it off in between, so let's try and get it right. Really interesting, and I think picks up on a lot of the other points made, and I think to see it diagrammatically also helps the brain kind of identify the different elements of those. Could we maybe think a bit about what good looks like? Sanjay, maybe moving on to you, any examples of where you felt a change has happened? What has made that happen? What are the lessons that we can take forward?
Yeah, probably a few. I think the biggest one for me feels to be about mindsets. So I gave evidence a couple of years ago to a House of Lords committee on sport and recreation. I said, you know, one of the challenges is that most organisations have these open doors policies, right? And no one asks themselves the question why nobody's walked through the open door. And actually, I mean, I find open door policies just in themselves maybe somewhat tautologous, because it assumes that there's a logical alternative, which is a closed doors policy, and who would ever brag that they have a closed door policy, right? Open door policy is like is by definition that's a table stake that should be taken for granted. It's actually, we should be having more of an open arms policy. This is very, very different to an open doors policy. It's saying, how can I welcome you in? How can I encourage you in? How can I listen to what you might be experiencing, or see the world through the way you see it, and see how we might overcome that barrier. So if you build a swimming pool and the outside walls are made of glass and you're in a predominantly Muslim area, don't be surprised if the local female Muslim population do not come into that swimming pool, because you didn't ask the locals. So actually, that when those things work effectively, I think, is when you start engaging with local people and asking them about their barriers and what they would need in order to feel a greater sense of belonging. One of the things we're trying to do at Kick It Out, and we're working on at the moment, is trying to measure that. How can we, we see in a very similar way belonging being at the heart of tackling discrimination and creating an inclusive culture in football and increasingly beyond into other sports. Well, actually, belonging's at the heart of that, but can we measure that? We talk a lot about the people who are already engaged in the sport or the activity. What about those people on the penumbra, just on the outskirts, who have got an interest and have got that connection, but haven't got the confidence to come over into the sport or into the area of activity? What is the barrier they're facing, or what would make them encouraged? And some of that, I think, comes down to that open arms, whether it's that mindset, that person when I first went into the gym that actually could see that I was a bit nervous, but wanting to encourage me. That was one very small example for me. Or how do we build it into the design of a local swimming pool in a predominantly Muslim area? It's every one of those little things, but they're actually, to me, examples of a broader mindset, which is how we go from open doors to open arms.
Thank you. That also builds to that idea that we had from the plenary session around relational, not transactional. It's how people relate to each other that can be part of the change. And I also wonder, when you started to talk about measures, whether when we're measuring activity and the sports that we do, how much of the measurement is about the transaction, not the relationships, and who's there and not there. So all really interesting. Belinda, your thoughts on this? What's worked well? Where do you feel more work needs to be done?
How much time have we got? Like, how much work can be done? What is good? Especially from my, again, speaking from my experience and going into the cycling industry. I didn't start in the cycling industry. I started in sports, very much like you guys, doing coaching and, you know, working with children all the way straight up. And then accidentally I fell into the cycling industry, which was like a smack in the face. And I didn't, to this topic, felt like I belonged at all. Because for one, I didn't feel like I was represented. And you just didn't see people like me really riding bikes or anything even onto an elite level. The Sinead Reid, who I absolutely adore. But then I always wondered why, you know, people who look like Sinead Reid, who look very similar to myself, how come, you know, her picture wasn't all over when I knew who Bradley Wiggins was and, God, Victoria Pendleton and all these others. So those are the questions I think I always ask myself. The sense of belonging and kind of what needs to be done is going into a space, especially when it comes to the cycling industry, and especially when it comes to bike mechanics, which I feel very passionately about, is that you can go into a bike shop and feel that, oh, there's someone that looks like me in there. And I think, you know, with the work that I do, so I run an organisation called Be Pedal Ready, which is about trying to encourage particularly more young girls and women into bike mechanics and cycling, is the fact that we are not represented at all, and especially when it comes down to race. And the stats at the minute are as low as 8%, and when it comes to bike mechanics, well, I think we're about 1-2%, if that. So I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done as regards of, you know, especially when it comes to these big industries and big, you know, bike suppliers and shops, that they could be doing a lot and making it a lot more different. And I think at the end of the day, it boils back down to that whole thing, and we hear it quite a lot, is representation matters. I see Naz over there, who does an incredible job. Hi, Naz. She does an incredible job in Cheetham Hill. And again, there's that default mode, which I say, which is, what does a bike mechanic look like? Well, they don't look like me, and they certainly don't look like Naz. And it really is about challenging the status quo and challenging what is happening now and challenging the default mode, which is a certain perception of what a bike mechanic and a cyclist looks like. And I think, you know, this is why I took on the role as bicycle mayor, to kind of challenge that quite a bit. So I won't go on too much. I'll stop there.
Thank you.
Okay, I'll start with,
Yeah, just one thought from me is that it's almost, we have created a little bit of a dichotomy between belonging and not belonging, and the reality is there are layers and layers and layers and not belonging, and the intersectionality kicks in, and it's much the disempowerment, the disenfranchisement is complex and multi-dimensional. Yeah, Kelly, over to you.
sorry, yeah. Examples, there's lots and lots of examples that I could give. I'm going to focus on netball and women and girls, if that's okay. So I think all of you saw this morning the BBC snippet around the refugee asylum session of netball, and Abby and Danielle are sitting over there. Amazing work of just that one example, but there's lots of other examples that those two can give around reaching different communities through the power of sport. And I think what that does, and those ladies have never played netball before, is that right, Abby? The first time of being part of a community for the first time in a different country, coming into a sport they've never played before. But as you saw in that video, that sense of belonging, of all being together and almost parking their history and what's happened to them in the past at the door to allow them to come into a space is phenomenal. And actually one of the key ingredients to all that is the coach, and Abby would not say this herself, so I'll say it for Abby, just the power of being that facilitator in that environment, and that whole creating a space where they're not being judged is the most powerful creation of a programme. The other example, sorry Abby, you're going to get called out twice here, which is different and actually has a different sense of belonging to it, was some work that Abby's done in Style Prison. And I went to the celebration event, and it still moves me now. And it was not only were those women, well, obviously in prison, they were playing netball, some of them for the first time, or played a long time ago at school. But the bit that got me was they invited their family, friends and families, to the event. And I sat in the chairs watching them play, and they were seeing for the first time their mums, and some of them were sort of aunties or whatever, being themselves, and had a sense of belonging within that sport where they were just being themselves. And that was absolutely incredible. I don't think they realised it, and literally one of the daughters was sitting in front of me, and her mum came along, and she was having the time of her life, and she was so hyper. And her daughter said to her mum, "I've never seen like this before." And it's just the power of that connection within the sport that, again, so quite different examples of belonging. The third one is Netball Her. So I don't know if anyone's heard of Netball Her, but it's a new initiative. Well, it's not new, we're nearly a year on now, but so we as England Netball, we sort of recognised that actually women and girls were dropping out of sport at key life stages when they're most vulnerable, when they need sport most, they're dropping out of sport. So Netball Her is all around supporting women and girls at all life stages to make sure that they can feel supported when they're in the sport, and if they leave the sport for pregnancy or just because they're having a tough time in life, that they feel that sport is a place they can feel welcome and feel that they can be themselves and be supported. So Netball Her is an approach that we're taking as a whole sport, but we're already starting to get stories of, oh wow, I'm finally been able to talk about what's I'm going through. Oh no, I'm not stupid. And to quote Danielle, I'm not going mad. Someone else is also feeling this, and I think it might be the menopause. So those types of things create a space where people can feel they can belong.
Thanks, Kelly. And I think bringing into this space that point, in particular in women's lives, that it's punctuated by particular experiences at particular time. Puberty is an absolute kind of transformational moment where everything that might have been going fine can suddenly disappear. Menopause at the other element, likewise, and in between, pregnancy, childbearing. For women, our experiences, our bodies can create whole new dilemmas around issues of inclusion and issues of engagement in activism and in movement. And I think that unless we understand that, unless that's part of our culture and discussions and processes and institutions, we are missing a trick. Adam.
Thank you. I'm going to give a couple of examples. One starting with an organisation that got it really wrong but then fixed it. So in a previous role, I used to work really closely with local authorities. I'm not going to tell you who. It wasn't Greater Manchester, Hayley, so don't worry. I got a really excited email where this local authority said, can you come in and meet us? So we used to work with them to try and ensure that their services were more inclusive and better for disabled people, to help disabled people access opportunities and feel like they belonged, taking part in their community. So they called me and we sat down for this meeting. They were really excited, and about a minute or two and I realised at some point I'm going to have to burst their bubble. So they were talking about how they'd fixed the problems that existed in their place because they'd made a swimming pool accessible and had made a running track wheelchair accessible. And I sort of posed the question, well, what about disabled people who don't want to swim or run? Or aren't interested or can't do that? And they just hadn't thought of it. They hadn't thought about what the people in their community actually wanted. And they were like, yeah, but they can swim and they can run. But maybe that's not what I want. Thankfully, they were in the process of building a big leisure centre. It's another clue to it might be. And they went out and they talked to the community, particularly disabled people and their families, about what actually do you want in this centre when we build it? What do you need? How can we make it better? Not just for what's in there, but things like public transport, things like changing places, facilities, all those things that were never thought of, that they'd learnt the lesson the hard way, that they'd spent a lot of money trying to fix a problem that didn't exist without addressing the real problem. So that was a real example where someone had got it wrong, but then they'd recognised that, and then they talked to people about what would help them feel like they belonged and got it better next time. So that was one. The other thing I'm going to give an example of is one of the programmes that we run. I can't take any credit for this because this started way before I did within the organisation, but we have a programme called Get Out, Get Active. We're a disability organisation. It's a programme that doesn't lead with disability or isn't for disabled people. It's a truly inclusive programme. We pick up a good proportion of disabled people through that programme, but it's not designed in that way. And we've done things like that program delivers yoga in Gurdwaras, it delivers rugby in LGBT communities in Wales, and it's completely set from what do people actually want, and it's set from a point of view of how can we be inclusive of everyone, not just disabled people, and that's the feedback we get from that. And it's really interesting because we're designing our new strategy, and the one word that keeps coming through from the people who we're trying to provide better services for is belonging. People want to feel like they belong, and when they've had that experience, it changes their life.
Thank you, and takes us back to that idea of belonging. It's not about fixing a particular problem, it's about that more holistic understanding of belonging. Okay, if we could move more directly to particular recommendations of what the audience out there can be doing. Any thoughts and calls for action? And then I think all of you can also put down any ideas that you have, any calls of action that you can have on the Menti process. But if we go back to each of the panelists, individual calls of action for everybody out there, maybe also for yourselves, points that you want to take forward.
Thanks, Helen. I think Adam touched on it absolutely there, and it's about having a different set of lenses on what needs to happen, and thinking outside of your own experiences, being open to other people's experiences and ideas, and that collection of co-creating those solutions. So, and an anticipation as well about what is coming our way in the future. So in the City of Manchester, we anticipate in the next census that 72% of the child population will be from black and brown and minoritised ethnicities. So actually, are we continuing to make sport, leisure, fitness, movement activities through a white lens? So it is about collecting in advance as well, but ultimately it is about those multiple of voices, multiple of lenses, and those experiences that then open up what needs to happen and change in order for belonging to actually be embedded in culture.
Look, I assume everyone here has a slightly different role in the ecosystem, and everyone can play a slightly different part. So it's quite difficult to come up with one tip that would work for absolutely everybody. I think the only thing that is common for all of us is the mindset that we bring to whatever the problem is that we solve, and whatever our role is in the ecosystem. And so I suppose I go back to what I said in the answer to the previous question, which is to encourage everyone to move from an open doors to an open arms mindset. And what does an open arms mindset look like, and why is that different to an open doors mindset? So, you know, to me, an open doors mindset, which I think is the prevailing mindset in sport and activity, has been for the last 30 years, is quite passive. It's a bit sort of build it and they will come, right? And it's not actively thinking about and actively listening to our communities and what do they want and need and what are the barriers that they're facing. And so if we think about this as more being rather than building the building and leaving the door open and then us sitting in our offices and wondering and waiting for people to come in, we're actually at the entrance to that door and we're beckoning and encouraging people in, and our job is to get people in through the door. So how do we do that? How do we beckon those people in? I think if we go into things with that kind of mindset, we're much more likely to think about, well, what is it? What is the barrier that person's facing? Well, I don't know, so I better ask them. So ask rather than assume. There are some really simple, I think, mindset things that we can do. So, yeah, my one tip that I think is applicable to everyone is think open arms, not open doors.
Hello. I'm going to keep mine short and very sweet. Be open to change, okay, and challenge your own default mode. What I mean by that is, when we think about the past, and we think about, I think somebody mentioned it before, we used to smoke on aeroplanes, and people would be smoking in the theatre and all that, and we think about that back then, and we think, oh God, I can't believe we did that. And I always think about what we're doing now, that in 10, 15, 20 years' time, are we going to look back at this present moment and go, blooming hell, what were they thinking there? Like, what is our default mode? And definitely coming back to cycling, and definitely coming back to bike mechanics. If you ever, those very rare moments in Manchester, there's Hannah over there, and she's an incredible bike mechanic who's over in the audience. If you see change, embrace it, and also give it a go. If you think something's not for you, then it really is for you. Just embrace change and challenge your own default mode.
Totally agree, and in fact, that's what that book's about. Is that it's our time in the light, and this is our time to create that change. So yeah, totally agree with that. Quite a specific one. I've referenced it. Is we're all quite good at working in silos. I think I can say that on behalf of the sports system. We're very good at this is our lane, this is the lane that we're going to stay in, and we're going to create our own resources. And actually, we'd be far more powerful at creating change and creating a safe space and a sense of belonging for the people out there if we did collectively do that together. And I think, you know, there's lots of resources and lots of examples of where we can work together to create a sense of belonging for people that want to be part of sport, physical activity for whatever reason. So I think for me, it's us aligning our resources and aligning our united force to be able to create that change that's needed. A specific one is around coaching. So I think, again, coaching qualifications are very technically driven. Do they teach anything in standard coaching qualifications around social, mental, physical, emotional well-being? No. There's standalone CPD modules that do, but it's not standard. And until we've got coaches and a workforce out there, or leaders, or whoever your workforce is, that actually can be more social, more empathetic, their social intelligence is supported, we're not going to create this change. So I think we as a sector has got to try and drive that change.
Thanks, Kelly. A couple of points from me. One, because this is an exam, I'm just going to plagiarise something that I heard earlier from my great colleague Sarah, who talked about the need to really think about this at the very beginning. So if you're responsible for designing or delivering services around sport and activity, thinking about how you can make people feel like they belong and develop something that's inclusive at the very start will definitely lead to a better service at the end, and is probably cheaper and better resourced. So there's that point. The second point is one, as you asked, that's quite personal to me. So as I spoke about at the very beginning, being a white, non-disabled, sadly middle-aged, although I don't believe it, male, like where do I belong in sort of these discussions? And it was mentioned earlier, actually, it's not the job of the IWG to sort out the problems that women face in sport. It has to be everyone. Just because we have Kick It Out, it doesn't mean racism is going to get solved. So if you are in the position that I'm in and you look like me and you're in the role that I'm in, we have to be more than just a good ally. We have to either use our platform to create change or give up our platform to have someone else's voice be heard. And until we get to that point, we're never going to get the change that we need.
Thank you. I mean, some brilliant summaries I thought there. You know, the diversity of people's experience, co-creation, the importance of mindset, open arms, challenging your own defaults, giving it a go, the importance of coaching, not being in silos. Please do add your thoughts. I had a few. The first is that small incremental changes are also important. You know, we're talking systemic in some ways. We're talking grand level, but every single one of us could do a bit more in both issues of inclusion and inclusions in issues around activity. So I think let's not forget the small changes, the starting somewhere, and yet the ultimate goal of a movement. That's what all of this is about. And I think the fact that GM Moving is growing and growing as a movement is what will deliver that systemic change. The relationship between people and structures and institutions as a barrier that was mentioned earlier, but also unless we get institutional change, we won't achieve what we need to. So the fact that all of us can play a role. And then data, you know, the importance of data and the importance of data measuring changes with people and who's included, not just what's been done. I think it's really, really important. And I think too often the data that we captures one lens, and not all of the other lenses that we need. Thank you, Sally. Thank you, Sanjay. Thank you, Belinda. Thank you, Kelly. Thank you, Adam. Thanks to all of you for coming. Thanks to GM Moving for making it happen. Thank you.
Can we say a massive thank you to Helen as well for being a superb facilitator?